The soap suds stung her raw knuckles as Lily Lancaster pressed the brush harder against the saloon floor, her knees aching through the thin fabric of her worn dress. Wondering if this was truly all life in New Mexico territory had left to offer her in the spring of 1884. The Three Rivers Saloon in Glenrio sat right on the border where Texas met New Mexico, a dusty crossroads town where cattle drives intersected with dreams and desperation. Lily had been scrubbing these floors for 6 months now, ever since her father's general store had burned down and left her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, her hands already showing the wear of hard labor that no amount of lye soap could wash away. The morning sun filtered through the dirty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden planks she was trying to restore to some semblance of respectability. The saloon owner, a gruff man named Henderson who smelled perpetually of whiskey and cigars, insisted the floors be waxed twice a week. Not mopped, not swept, but properly scrubbed on hands and knees and then waxed until they gleamed. It was back-breaking work that paid barely enough to keep a room at the boarding house and food in her stomach. "You missed a spot near the bar," Henderson called from his perch on a stool, counting last night's earnings. He never helped, just watched and criticized. Lily bit back the sharp retort that rose to her lips. She needed this job. The alternative was far worse in a town like Glenrio, where respectable work for women was scarce, and the other options were things she refused to consider. She dipped her brush back into the bucket and attacked the supposed spot with renewed vigor, even though she could not see any difference between it and the rest of the floor. The door swung open, letting in a blast of March wind that carried dust and the smell of horses. Lily did not look up. Cowboys came and went all day long, especially this time of year when the cattle drives were preparing to head north to Kansas. They would drink, gamble, sometimes fight, and she would clean up after them. That was the rhythm of her days now. "Henderson," a deep voice said, and something about the tone made Lily glance up despite herself. The man standing in the doorway was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, but there was something in his bearing that suggested capability and confidence. His eyes, a striking blue even in the dim saloon light, swept the room before landing on Henderson. "Jake," Henderson said, his tone considerably more respectful than when he spoke to Lily. "Did not expect to see you back in Glenrio. Thought you were up in Colorado territory." "Was," the man said, stepping further inside. His boots thudded on the floor Lily had just cleaned, leaving new tracks. She tried not to let her frustration show. "Things did not work out as planned up there. Heard you might need a manager, someone to run the evening shifts and keep order." Jake Jennings. Lily had heard the name before, though she had never met him. He had grown up around Glenrio but left years ago to make his fortune elsewhere. From what she remembered of the gossip, he was around 27 or 28 now, had worked as a ranch hand, a trail boss, and briefly as a deputy marshal in some Colorado mining town. "Mike could use someone," Henderson said carefully, "but I cannot pay much. Business has been slow." Jake's gaze swept the room again, and this time it lingered on Lily. She felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of how she must look, on her knees in a wet dress with her dark hair escaping from its pins and her face flushed from exertion. She looked away quickly, focusing on her scrubbing. "The place could use some fixing up," Jake observed. "When is the last time you painted? And those chairs are falling apart." "I run a saloon, not a palace," Henderson said defensively. "Folks come here to drink, not admire the decor." "Folks come here because it is the only saloon in Glenrio," Jake corrected mildly. But if you want to compete with the new place that is opening over in D, you might want to reconsider your approach. Lily's ears perked up at this. She had not heard about a new saloon opening in the neighboring town. If the Three Rivers lost business, Henderson would likely cut her hours or worse, let her go entirely. "Fine," Henderson said after a long moment. "You can start tonight. $20 a month plus room and board upstairs. You keep order, manage the evening crowd, and handle any troublemakers. And you help with improvements around here in your spare time." $30, Jake countered, "and I want a say in how we run things." 25, Henderson shot back, "and you can make suggestions, but I still own the place." Jake considered this, then extended his hand. "Deal." As the two men shook on it, Lily went back to her scrubbing. This new development would change things at the Three Rivers, but she could not yet tell if it would be for better or worse. She had learned not to trust easily, not after the banker who had called in her father's loan the moment the store burned, not after the supposed family friends who had turned their backs when she needed help most. The wax came next. She poured it carefully onto the clean floor, spreading it thin with a cloth wrapped around a wooden block. This part required her to move backward across the floor, ensuring she did not step on the freshly waxed sections. Her knees screamed in protest, but she kept going, focusing on making each section as smooth and gleaming as possible. "You are working her pretty hard, Henderson," Jake's voice came from somewhere behind her. "I pay her to work," Henderson replied. "If you got a problem with how I run my business, you can walk right back out that door." "Just making an observation," Jake said. "When is the last time you let her take a break? She can break when she's done." Lily heard footsteps approaching and tensed. Then Jake was kneeling beside her on the floor, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something clean like soap. Her heart did an unexpected skip in her chest. "You are going to ruin your good pants," she said without thinking, immediately regretting the familiarity. "These are not my good pants," Jake replied, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "These are my only pants, and they have survived worse than a little floor wax." He picked up a cloth and dipped it in the wax can, then started spreading it on the section next to where she was working. His movements were efficient, and she realized he had done this kind of work before. "You do not have to help me," Lily said quietly, acutely aware of Henderson watching them both. "I know," Jake said. "But we will finish faster this way, and then maybe you can take a break before the lunch crowd comes in." They worked in silence for several minutes, moving backward across the floor in tandem. Lily was intensely conscious of his presence beside her, the way his hands moved with practiced competence, the fact that he had chosen to kneel in the wax and dirt to help her when he clearly did not have to. "What is your name?" Jake asked after a while. "Lily Lancaster," she said. "Lancaster," he repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to Thomas Lancaster who ran the general store? He was my father." "I am sorry for your loss," Jake said, and something in his tone suggested he actually meant it. "I heard about the fire. That was a hard blow for the town, losing that store." "Yes," Lily said shortly. She did not like talking about it, about how her father had died trying to save his ledgers from the flames, about how she had discovered afterward that he owed more money than the land was worth, about how quickly everything had fallen apart. "You know," Jake said, changing the subject with what felt like deliberate tact, "this floor is going to look real nice when we are done. You do good work." It was such a simple compliment, but it hit Lily square in the chest. Nobody had said anything kind to her in months. Henderson only criticized. The other workers at the saloon, the bartender and the evening girls, mostly ignored her. The townspeople looked through her as if she were invisible, no longer the respectable merchant's daughter but just another woman scrubbing floors. "Thank you," she managed. They finished the floor together, and Jake was right. It did look nice. The wood gleamed in the morning light, reflecting the windows and the bar like a polished mirror. Lily sat back on her heels, surveying their work, and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. "Henderson," Jake called. "The lady needs a break and something to drink." "She can get her own drink," Henderson said, but there was less bite in his voice than usual. Perhaps he was trying to stay on good terms with his new manager. Jake stood and offered Lily his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it, letting him pull her to her feet. Her knees protested, stiff from being bent so long, and she wobbled slightly. His hand on her elbow steadied her. "Thank you," she said again, looking up at him properly for the first time. He had a strong face, sun-weathered and honest. There was a scar along his jaw, faded with time, and his blue eyes held something she could not quite name. Not pity exactly, but understanding, as if he knew what it was like to be down and struggling. "Come on," he said. "Let us get you some water and something to eat. You look like you could use both." Lily wanted to protest that she could not afford to buy lunch, but Jake was already steering her toward the bar. He signaled the bartender, a thin man named Morris who rarely spoke. "Get her some bread and cheese," Jake said, "and water. Put it on my tab." "You do not have a tab yet," Morris pointed out. "Then start one." Lily perched on a bar stool, uncomfortably aware that she was not usually allowed to sit at the bar. Henderson had rules about that, about keeping the working girls and the cleaning woman separate from the customers. But Henderson was in the back room now, probably tallying his money, and Morris just shrugged and produced the requested food. The bread was fresh, probably from the bakery down the street, and the cheese was sharp and good. Lily tried to eat slowly with some dignity, but she was hungrier than she had realized. Jake leaned against the bar beside her, not eating, just watching the room with assessing eyes. "So what are your plans?" he asked after a moment. "My plans," Lily repeated blankly. "For the future." "Are you staying in Glenrio, planning to move on?" Lily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I cannot afford to move on. I can barely afford to stay. But I do not have much choice in the matter." "There is always a choice," Jake said quietly. "Is there?" Lily looked at him directly. "Tell me, what choices does a woman have when she has no money, no family, and no prospects? I scrub floors because it is honest work that keeps a roof over my head. I am grateful for it, even when my knees bleed and my hands crack. So please do not talk to me about choices." She had not meant to be so sharp, so bitter. But the words tumbled out anyway, 6 months of frustration and fear and exhaustion finding a target. She braced herself for anger or dismissal. Instead, Jake nodded slowly. "You are right, I apologize. That was an ignorant thing to say." Lily blinked. She had not expected that. "I just meant," Jake continued, "that sometimes opportunities arise when we least expect them. And sometimes we have to make our own opportunities, even when it seems impossible." "Is that what you did?" Lily asked. "Made your own opportunities?" "I tried," Jake said. "Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it did not, but I kept trying. That is all any of us can do." There was something in his voice, some shadow of past disappointment or failure that made Lily curious despite herself. But before she could ask, Henderson emerged from the back room. "Jennings, I need you to look at the storeroom. We have got a leak somewhere and half my liquor is water damaged. And Lily, those windows need washing before the evening crowd." Just like that, the moment broke. Lily finished her bread and cheese, drained her water, and went to fetch the window washing supplies. But as she worked through the afternoon, she found her thoughts drifting back to the man who had knelt beside her to help wax the floor, who had bought her lunch without expecting anything in return, who had looked at her like she was a person worth noticing. Jake Jennings started work that evening, and Lily saw immediately why Henderson had hired him. He had a natural authority that kept the rowdier cowboys in line without seeming overbearing. When a fight broke out between two ranch hands over a card game, Jake broke it up with a few quiet words and a firm hand on each man's shoulder. When one of the evening girls complained about a customer getting too familiar, Jake escorted the man out with a polite but unyielding insistence that he come back when he could behave properly. Lily was mopping up a spill near the back tables when she overheard two of the regulars talking about him. "That is Jake Jennings," one of them said. "Used to work for the Rocking J Ranch before he left town. Heard he had some trouble up in Colorado, something about a mining claim gone bad." "Heard he was a lawman up there," the other one replied. "Wore a badge and everything." "Yeah, but that did not last. Something happened, I do not know what, but he is back here now, so could not have been too bad." Lily filed this information away, curious about what had brought Jake back to Glenrio, but knowing it was none of her business. She had enough of her own troubles without getting involved in someone else's. The days fell into a new rhythm. Lily still scrubbed and waxed the floors twice a week, still washed windows and cleaned up after the nightly crowds. But Jake made small changes that gradually improved conditions. He convinced Henderson to hire another cleaning girl to split the work. He fixed the leak in the storeroom and repaired the broken chairs. He even talked Henderson into painting the exterior, giving the Three Rivers a fresh coat of white that made it stand out from the dusty brown buildings around it. And every time Lily was on her knees scrubbing, Jake found an excuse to help. Not always, and never in a way that felt like pity. He would just happen to be free, just happen to have a cloth handy, just happen to kneel beside her and work until the job was done faster. They talked during those times, sharing pieces of their lives in small increments. Lily learned that Jake's parents had died when he was young, that he had been raised by an uncle who worked him hard on the ranch, that he had left Glenrio at 19 determined to make something of himself. She learned about the mining claim in Colorado that had seemed so promising until his partner had cheated him out of his share. She learned about the brief stint as a deputy marshal that had ended when he had refused to look the other way while the town's richest man beat his wife. "So you gave up the badge rather than compromise," Lily said one morning as they waxed together. "It was not much of a choice," Jake replied. "I could not live with myself if I had stayed." "That sounds like a choice to me," Lily said. "A hard one, but the right one." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition. They were both people who had tried to do the right thing and paid a price for it. In turn, Lily found herself sharing things she had not spoken about to anyone. How her father had borrowed money to expand the store, confident that the railroad coming through would bring prosperity. How the railroad had changed its route at the last minute, leaving Glenrio a backwater. How her father had worked himself into exhaustion trying to make ends meet. How the fire that killed him had started from a lamp knocked over in his weariness. "You think he gave up?" Lily asked one day, voicing the fear that haunted her dreams. "Do you think he just stopped caring whether he lived or died?" "No," Jake said firmly. "From what I remember of your father, he was a fighter. The fire was an accident, a terrible accident. You cannot blame yourself for it, and you cannot let guilt make you think less of him." "I do not blame myself," Lily said, but even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true. Had she done enough to help? Should she have noticed how tired he was, how defeated? "Lily," Jake said, and he reached over to touch her hand where it rested on the wax cloth. "You cannot save people from accidents or fate or their own bad luck. All you can do is keep living, keep trying." That is what he would want for you. His hand was warm and solid over hers, and Lily felt something crack open inside her chest, some frozen place that had been locked tight since her father's death. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She could not afford to cry, not here, not now. But Jake saw anyway. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her, clean and neatly folded. Such a small gesture, but it undid her completely. She pressed the cloth to her face and let herself cry quietly, while Jake kept his hand on hers and waited. When she finally composed herself, she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the weight had made it easier to carry. "Thank you," she whispered. "Anytime," Jake said simply. Spring turned to early summer, and the relationship between Lily and Jake deepened in quiet, incremental ways. He brought her coffee in the mornings before she started work. She mended the tear in his good shirt, the one he wore when he needed to look presentable. They took to walking together after her work was done, strolling the dusty streets of Glenrio as the sun set and the town settled into evening calm. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had once held and maybe still harbored in secret. Jake had grown up hearing stories about California, about the ocean and the cities and the opportunities there. Lily had always wanted to travel east, to see New York and Boston, and all the places she had only read about in her father's newspapers. "Maybe someday we will both get there," Jake said one evening as they sat on the bench outside the general store that had once been her father's. "Maybe," Lily agreed, though she could not quite make herself believe it. Dreams seemed like luxuries she could no longer afford. "I am serious," Jake said. "I am saving money. Henderson pays me decent and I do not spend much. Another year or two and I will have enough to make a real start somewhere, maybe buy into a business or get my own land." "That sounds nice," Lily said. "Come with me," Jake said suddenly. Lily turned to look at him, startled. "What? When I go, come with me. You could start fresh somewhere new, somewhere nobody knows about the fire or the debts. You could be more than a cleaning woman." "Jake," Lily said carefully, "I appreciate the thought, but I cannot just leave with you. People would talk. My reputation is about all I have left." "Then marry me," Jake said. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Lily's heart hammered in her chest. "You do not mean that," she said finally. "You are just being kind." "I mean it," Jake said. He shifted on the bench to face her fully. "I know it is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few months. But Lily, I have been thinking about this for weeks now. Every time I see you on your knees scrubbing those floors, working so hard for so little, I want to give you better. Every time we talk, I realize how much I enjoy your company, how much I look forward to seeing you. You are strong and smart and kind, and I would be honored if you would consider being my wife." Lily stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage. It was the practical solution to all her problems. As Jake's wife, she would have security, protection, a future. She would not have to scrub floors anymore or worry about where her next meal was coming from, but she did not want to marry for practical reasons. She had seen what happened to marriages built on convenience rather than love. They became brittle things full of resentment and regret. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," Jake said immediately. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." But even as Lily tried to think it through rationally, her heart was already leaning toward yes. Because the truth was, she had fallen for Jake Jennings. It had happened so gradually that she had not even noticed until this moment. Somewhere between his kindness and his quiet strength, between his helping hands and his genuine respect, she had come to care for him deeply. The question was whether caring was enough, whether it could become love, real love, the kind that lasted. She watched him over the next few days, testing her feelings. Did her heart lift when she saw him in the mornings? Yes. Did she find excuses to be near him? Yes. Did she imagine a future with him, not just as an escape from hardship, but as something she actually wanted? Yes, it was Morris, the bartender, who finally pushed her to a decision. He caught her staring at Jake one evening and shook his head with something like affection. "That man is gone on you," Morris said. "Anyone with eyes can see it." "You think so?" Lily asked. "I know so. And unless I am mistaken, you feel the same. So what are you waiting for? Life is too short and too hard to waste time being scared." Morris was not usually one for speeches, and the fact that he had spoken up meant something. Lily thought about his words as she scrubbed the floors the next morning. Life was short. Her father's death had taught her that, and it was hard. Her last 6 months had proven that beyond doubt. But maybe, just maybe, it could also be good. Maybe she was allowed to reach for happiness, even if it felt risky and uncertain. Jake knelt beside her with his cloth and wax can, falling into their familiar rhythm. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and Lily gathered her courage. "Yes," she said quietly. Jake looked at her. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you," Lily said, louder now. "If the offer is still open, my answer is yes." The smile that broke across Jake's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He set down his cloth and reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. "I bought this 2 weeks ago," he admitted. "I have been carrying it around, hoping you would say yes." He took her left hand, sticky with wax and work, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. And then, there on their knees in the wax and soap suds, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and the smell of lye and lemon in the air, Jake leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tender and sweet, full of promise and hope. Lily's eyes fluttered closed and she let herself feel it, really feel it. The warmth of his lips on hers, the way his hand cupped her cheek with such care, the rightness of this moment. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "I love you," Jake said. "I should have said that before. I love you, Lily Lancaster, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "I love you too," Lily said, and realized it was true. Somewhere in the past few months, care had deepened into love, affection into devotion. "I do not need you to make me happy. I just need you to be beside me, whatever comes." "I can do that," Jake promised. Henderson chose that moment to emerge from the back room. He took one look at them, kneeling together on the half-waxed floor, Lily's hand in Jake's and matching foolish grins on both their faces, and sighed. "You are getting married, I suppose," he said. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Well, congratulations, but finish the floor first." They did finish the floor, laughing together like children, giddy with joy and possibility. And then, Jake insisted Lily take the rest of the day off, and they went to find the circuit preacher to arrange the wedding. The preacher was an elderly man named Reverend Thomas, who traveled between the small towns in the area, preaching on Sundays and performing weddings and funerals as needed. He was staying at the boarding house where Lily rented her tiny room, and he was delighted to hear about the engagement. "I remember your father," he told Lily. "He was a good man. He would be happy to know you found someone worthy of you. When can you marry us?" Jake asked. "How about this Sunday?" the Reverend suggested. "That gives you a few days to prepare, and I will be preaching that morning anyway. We can do the ceremony after the service." Sunday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare for a wedding, to start a new life. It seemed impossibly fast, and yet not fast enough. Lily wanted to be Jake's wife now, wanted the security and the partnership and the love that the title promised. They spent those 4 days in a flurry of activity. Jake used some of his savings to rent a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room place with a kitchen and a bedroom and a little porch that faced west toward the mountains. It was not much, but it was clean and solid, and it would be theirs. Lily took her one nice dress, the dark blue one she had worn to her father's funeral, and altered it with some ribbon and lace she bought from the dry goods store. It would not be a fancy wedding dress, but it would be pretty enough. She washed her hair with rose-scented soap and practiced pinning it up in a more elaborate style than her usual simple knot. The other women in town, hearing about the wedding, surprised Lily with their kindness. The baker's wife brought by a small cake, simple but beautifully decorated. The seamstress offered to press Lily's dress so it would look its best. Even some of the evening girls from the saloon pooled their money to buy a set of dish towels and a teapot as a wedding gift. "You have always been decent to us," one of them explained. "Never looked down on us or acted superior. That means something." Lily was moved to tears by the gesture. She had felt so alone for so long, convinced that nobody in Glenrio cared about her anymore. But apparently she had been wrong. Apparently, kindness was noticed and remembered, even in a hard place like this. Jake was busy too, getting the house ready and making arrangements. He bought a bed frame and mattress from a family that was leaving town, and a table and chairs from the widow Carson who was moving in with her daughter. He stocked the kitchen with basic supplies and made sure the stove was working properly. He even planted a small garden in the back, quick-growing vegetables that might give them something by late summer. "I want you to have a real home," he told Lily when she came to see the house the day before the wedding. "Not just a place to sleep, but somewhere you feel safe and happy." "I will be happy anywhere with you," Lily said honestly. But she appreciated the effort, the care he was taking to build something for them. It spoke of permanence, of commitment, of a man who thought about the future and prepared for it. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, the sky a brilliant blue without a cloud in sight. Lily dressed carefully in her altered blue dress, pinning her hair up with extra care, and even dabbing a little of the precious rose water behind her ears. When she looked at herself in the small mirror in her boarding house room, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. When had that happened? The church service was held in the saloon of all places, since Glenrio did not have an actual church building yet. Henderson had agreed to close for a few hours Sunday morning to let the preacher use the space. The irony of getting married in a saloon was not lost on Lily, but she did not care. What mattered was the commitment, not the location. The room was fuller than she had expected. Besides the usual Sunday worshippers, there were people who had come just for the wedding. Cowboys from nearby ranches, townspeople who remembered her father, even some travelers passing through who had heard there was a celebration and stopped to join. Morris the bartender was there, wearing what looked like his only clean shirt. Henderson himself sat in the back row, looking uncomfortable but present. And there at the front, standing beside Reverend Thomas, was Jake. He wore his good pants and the shirt Lily had mended, and he had clearly made an effort to tame his unruly hair. But what struck her most was the expression on his face when he saw her walking toward him. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, like he could not quite believe his good fortune. Lily walked down the makeshift aisle, her heart pounding but her steps steady. This was right. This was what she wanted, what she chose. When she reached Jake's side, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. The Reverend began the ceremony, his voice strong and sure despite his age. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Lily barely heard the traditional words. She was too focused on Jake, on the way he looked at her, on the feeling of his hand in hers. This was real. This was happening. "Do you, Jake Jennings, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Jake said firmly. his eyes never leaving Lily's face. "And do you, Lily Lancaster, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Lily said, her voice strong and clear. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake stepped closer, cupping Lily's face in his hands with infinite gentleness. Then he kissed her, not the brief peck she had expected in front of all these witnesses, but a real kiss, deep and sweet and full of promise. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Lily barely noticed. All she knew was the warmth of Jake's lips on hers, the solid reality of his arms around her, the joy that bubbled up inside her like a spring. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and laughing. Jake took her hand and raised it high, showing off the simple gold band. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "may I present my wife, Lily Jennings, Lily Jennings." She had a new name now, a new identity. The struggling orphan was gone, replaced by a woman with a partner, a future, a home. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The baker's wife brought out the cake she had made, and someone produced a jug of lemonade and another of whiskey. There was music too. One of the cowboys had a fiddle, and he played cheerful tunes that had people clapping and stomping their feet. Jake and Lily had their first dance right there in the saloon, on the floor they had waxed together so many times. Jake was not a particularly graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic, spinning Lily around until she was dizzy and laughing. She felt light, almost floating, as if all the heaviness of the past months had been lifted away. People came up to congratulate them throughout the afternoon. Henderson shook Jake's hand and actually smiled at Lily, telling her she had done well for herself. Morris gave them a bottle of good wine as a gift, expensive stuff, that Henderson kept locked up for special customers. The widow Carson hugged Lily and told her she was happy to see young people finding love in such hard times. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Jake leaned close to Lily and whispered, "Ready to go home, home. They're home, together." "Yes," Lily said. They walked hand in hand through the dusty streets of Glenrio toward the little house on the edge of town. The evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and desert flowers. In the distance, the mountains were silhouetted against the orange and pink sky. Jake carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and then set her down gently in the main room. The house looked beautiful in the golden evening light, the simple furniture gleaming, the curtains Lily had hung earlier that week stirring in the breeze from the open windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jennings," Jake said softly. "It feels good to be here," Lily said. "It feels right." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Jake held Lily close and stroked her hair. They talked quietly about the future, about their hopes and dreams, about the life they wanted to build together. "I am going to keep working at the saloon for now," Jake said. "But I am saving toward buying some land. Maybe we could start a small ranch, run cattle or horses. Would you like that?" "I would like anything as long as we are together," Lily said. "But yes, I think I would like that. A place of our own where we could build something lasting." "And children," Jake said tentatively. "If we are blessed with them, would you want children?" Lily thought about this. A year ago she would have said no, would have thought she could not possibly bring children into such an uncertain world. But now, with Jake beside her and a future opening up before them, the idea did not seem frightening. It seemed wonderful. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." Jake kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you so much, Lily. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Lily assured him. "You already are." The months that followed their wedding were the happiest of Lily's life. She quit her job at the saloon, and while they could not afford for her not to work at all, Jake insisted she find something less physically demanding. She ended up working part-time at the dry goods store, helping with inventory and serving customers. It was pleasant work, and the owner, an older man named Mr. Peterson, treated her with respect and paid her fairly. Jake continued managing the evening shifts at the Three Rivers, and Henderson, true to his word, gave him increasing responsibility over how the place was run. Jake implemented new policies, like refusing to serve anyone who was already clearly drunk and insisting that disagreements be settled outside rather than brawling in the saloon. Business actually improved, as word spread that the Three Rivers was a place where a man could drink in relative peace. But the real joy was in the small domestic moments they shared. Cooking breakfast together in the mornings, Jake attempting to make pancakes and usually burning them while Lily laughed. Working in their little garden in the evenings, coaxing tomatoes and beans from the stubborn earth. Sitting on the porch at night, watching the stars come out and talking about anything and everything. Lily found herself blooming under the steady warmth of Jake's love. The worry lines that had etched themselves around her eyes began to smooth. Her hands, though still work-roughened, no longer bled and cracked. She gained weight, filling out the hollows that poverty and stress had carved into her frame. She was not just surviving anymore, she was living. By late fall, Lily realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Jake. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, Jake's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He actually shouted with joy, then immediately apologized for being too loud, then picked her up and spun her around before remembering to be gentle and setting her down carefully. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Lily confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "In the spring, probably April or May." Jake immediately became almost comically protective. He did not want her to lift anything heavy, did not want her to work too much, wanted her to rest constantly. Lily had to remind him that pregnancy was not an illness, that women had been having babies since the beginning of time while still going about their lives. But his care was touching, and she let him fuss over her when it mattered. He bought extra food to make sure she was eating enough. He took over all the heavy chores around the house. He talked to the baby every night, his hand on Lily's growing stomach, telling their child about the world it would be born into and all the things they would do together. Winter in New Mexico territory could be harsh, but that year it was relatively mild. Jake had saved enough to buy firewood in bulk, so their little house stayed warm even on the coldest nights. Lily spent much of her time sewing, making tiny clothes for the baby and blankets to keep it warm. The women in town, seeing her condition, stopped by with gifts and advice. The widow Carson brought a beautiful cradle her late husband had built decades ago for their own children. The seamstress gave Lily fabric scraps perfect for baby clothes. Even some of the saloon girls stopped by with knitted booties and caps. "You really have made a place for yourself here," Jake observed one day as Lily showed him yet another gift from a neighbor. "We have," Lily corrected. "People respect you, Jake. They see how hard you work, how fairly you treat everyone. That reflects on me too." As winter turned to spring and Lily's stomach grew round and heavy, they continued to plan for the future. Jake had been talking to some of the local ranchers, learning about the cattle business and looking for opportunities. He had his eye on a piece of land about 5 miles out of town, good grazing land with a creek running through it. The owner was getting old and thinking about selling, and Jake was hoping to have enough saved by the end of the year to make an offer. "Can you imagine?" he said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Our own land, our own ranch. We could call it the Jennings Ranch or maybe something about you." "The Lily Creek Ranch. Let us buy the land first, then worry about naming it," Lily said practically, but she was smiling. She loved seeing Jake excited about the future, loved planning and dreaming with him. The baby came in late April, on a warm afternoon when the desert was just starting to bloom. Lily's labor started mid-morning, and Jake immediately sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who had delivered half the babies in Glenrio. Jake wanted to stay with Lily through the labor, but Mrs. Rodriguez shooed him out, insisting that birthing rooms were no place for nervous husbands. Jake paced outside for hours, wearing a path in the dirt, jumping every time he heard a sound from inside. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, a baby's cry, strong and healthy. A moment later, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the door, smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife did wonderfully. She is tired but fine." Jake burst into the room to find Lily propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face. His tiny fists waved in the air, and his eyes, when they briefly opened, were dark blue. He was perfect. "Can I hold him?" Jake asked. Lily carefully transferred the baby to Jake's arms, showing him how to support the head. Jake held his son like he was made of glass, staring down at him with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is so small," Jake whispered. "He is over 8 pounds, Mrs. Rodriguez said. "That is not small for a baby. He is going to be a big boy like his father. What should we name him?" Lily asked. They had discussed names for months without settling on anything definite. But now, looking at their son, Jake had an idea. "Joseph," he said. "After your father, Thomas Joseph Lancaster. We could call him Joseph Jennings. What do you think?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, the good kind. Her father would never meet his grandson, but this way his memory would live on. "Joseph," she repeated. "Yes, that is perfect." Baby Joseph was a good baby as babies went. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, and while he had his fussy moments, he was generally content. Jake was completely smitten, spending every free moment with his son. He would hold Joseph for hours, just watching him sleep or making faces to get him to smile. Lily adjusted to motherhood with a combination of instinct and advice from the more experienced women in town. There were challenging moments, certainly. Nights when Joseph would not stop crying, and Lily was so tired she could barely think. Days when she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping this tiny person alive and healthy. But there were also incredible moments of joy. The first time Joseph smiled at her, really smiled, recognition in his eyes. The way he would quiet when Jake sang to him in his off-key voice. The feeling of his small weight in her arms, solid and real and hers. Jake kept working at the saloon, but he was more motivated than ever to save money. He wanted to buy that land, wanted to give his family security and a future. He took on extra work when he could, helping with roundups for the local ranches, doing carpentry repairs around town, whatever would bring in additional income. By the time Joseph was a year old, toddling around their little house and getting into everything with the determined curiosity of a child that age, Jake had saved enough to make an offer on the land. The negotiations took several weeks, but finally, in the summer of 1886, the land was theirs. 80 acres of decent grazing land with water access, enough to start small and build from there. Jake gave his notice at the saloon, and Henderson, while sorry to lose him, understood. They parted on good terms, with Henderson telling Jake he was welcome back anytime if ranching did not work out. The first year of ranching was brutally hard. They started with a small herd of cattle bought from a rancher who was downsizing, just 20 head to begin with. Jake built a simple barn and fences, working from dawn to dusk in the summer heat. Lily helped where she could, managing the house and Joseph while also learning to handle the financial side of the ranch. They made mistakes, plenty of them. Lost cattle to predators because they had not secured the fencing properly. Miscalculated how much hay they would need for winter. Struggled to find buyers for their beef when it was time to sell. But they learned from each mistake, adapted, and kept going. By the second year, things were starting to stabilize. They added to their herd gradually, and Jake hired a young man named Tom to help with the work. Tom was only 18, new to the area and looking for ranch work, and he proved to be a quick learner and hard worker. Having the extra help made a huge difference, allowing Jake to focus on the bigger picture of running the ranch rather than being overwhelmed by daily chores. Joseph grew into a bright, energetic little boy who loved the animals and wanted to follow his father everywhere. By the time he was 3, he was helping with the cattle, which mostly meant getting in the way and asking endless questions, but Jake was patient and happy to have him around. In the spring of 1888, Lily discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous about the whole process, more confident in her ability to manage both pregnancy and the demands of ranch life. Jake was just as excited as the first time, though he tried to be less overbearing in his protectiveness. Their daughter was born in early December, a beautiful baby girl with Lily's dark hair and Jake's blue eyes. They named her Laura, and Joseph was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking when she would be big enough to play with him. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. By 1890, they had over 100 head of cattle and had expanded their land by buying an adjoining 40 acres. They built a proper house to replace the original cabin, nothing fancy but substantial, with separate bedrooms for the children and a real parlor. Jake even installed glass windows, a luxury that made Lily feel like a wealthy woman. Life was not always easy. There were years of drought when they struggled to keep the cattle fed and healthy. There were years of low beef prices when they barely broke even. Joseph got sick one winter with a fever that had both parents terrified, though he eventually recovered fully. Laura proved to be as spirited as her brother, getting into mischief that tested Lily's patience. But through all of it, Jake and Lily remained partners in the truest sense. They made decisions together, worked together, supported each other through challenges. The love that had begun beside a wax-slicked floor in a dusty saloon only deepened with time, tempered by shared experiences and mutual respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Lily by taking her back to Glenrio for the evening. Tom agreed to watch the children, and Jake and Lily rode into town dressed in their best clothes. Jake took her to the Three Rivers Saloon, which looked much the same as it had a decade earlier, though Henderson had finally retired and sold it to Morris the bartender. "I wanted to bring you back to where it all started," Jake explained as they sat at a corner table, sipping lemonade because Lily had never developed a taste for alcohol. "Where you proposed while we were waxing the floor on our knees," Lily said, smiling at the memory. "Best decision I ever made," Jake said. "Asking you to marry me, I was so nervous you would say no." "I was terrified to say yes," Lily admitted, "but also unable to imagine saying no. You made me feel like life could be good again after I thought I had lost everything. You gave me something to work for," Jake said. A reason to build a future instead of just drifting from place to place. They talked late into the evening, reminiscing about their early days together, laughing about the mistakes they had made learning to ranch, sharing their dreams for the years to come. And when the evening was over and they rode back to their ranch under a sky full of stars, Lily felt a profound sense of contentment. This was the life she was meant to live, with this man in this place. More years passed. Joseph grew into a teenager who showed a real aptitude for ranching, already talking about taking over the business someday. Laura, now 10, was proving to have a good head for numbers and was helping Lily manage the ranch accounts. And in 1892, Lily gave birth to another son, Samuel, a surprise baby who was nonetheless welcomed with joy. The Jennings Ranch became known throughout the area as a well-run operation. Jake had a reputation as a fair man who treated his workers well and his cattle humanely. Lily was respected as a capable businesswoman who drove hard bargains but always honored her agreements. They were solid members of the community, attending church socials and helping neighbors in times of trouble. Sometimes, particularly on Sundays when the ranch work was light, Lily would think back to that desperate woman scrubbing floors in a saloon, wondering if life had anything more to offer. She could hardly believe that woman had been her. So much had changed, and yet in some ways she was still the same person, still determined and hardworking, still choosing to keep going even when things were difficult. The difference was she was no longer alone. She had Jake beside her, a true partner in every sense. She had her children, each one a miracle and a blessing. She had a home she had helped build and a business she was proud of. She had friends and a community and a sense of belonging. On a warm spring evening in 1895, when Joseph was 14, Laura 12, and Samuel 3, the whole family gathered on the porch of their house to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, this evening time together before the children went to bed. Jake sat in his rocking chair with Samuel on his lap. Lily sat beside him, her hand in his. Joseph and Laura sat on the steps, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens in the morning. "I have been thinking," Jake said during a lull in the children's bickering. "We have done well with the ranch, better than I ever imagined when we started, and I think it is time we started planning for the next generation." "I am only 14, Joseph protested. "You are not making me take over yet, are you?" "Not yet," Jake said with a laugh. "But soon you will be old enough to take on more responsibility. And Laura, you have a good business mind. I think you should learn even more about the financial side of things. And Samuel, well, you have plenty of time to figure out what you want to do." "I want to be a cowboy like Papa," Samuel announced. "You are well on your way," Jake assured him. Lily looked at her family, at the ranch stretching out before them in the golden evening light, at the life they had built together, and felt a deep sense of peace. This was success, not wealth or fame or any of the grand ambitions she had once held, but this: love and family and honest work and a place to call home. "Thank you," she said to Jake. "For what?" he asked. "For kneeling beside me that day, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for asking me to share your life." Jake squeezed her hand. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a wandering cowboy who did not have much to offer except determination and hope. You made me want to be better, to do better. You gave me a family and a home. Everything good in my life started the day I knelt beside you on that saloon floor." "You had more than determination and hope," Lily said. "You had kindness and strength and integrity. You still do." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear, surrounded by their children and the life they had created through hard work, dedication, and love. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. The years continued to roll forward. Joseph did indeed take over more of the ranching responsibilities as he grew, showing the same dedication and capability his father had demonstrated. At 19, he married a local girl named Emily, and they built a small house on the far end of the Jennings property, starting their own family while still helping run the ranch. Laura surprised everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to become a teacher. She studied diligently and eventually passed the teaching examination, becoming the school teacher for the small school that had been built near Glenrio. She met a young lawyer there, a man who had moved out from Kansas City to open a practice in the growing town. They married when Laura was 20, and while she stopped teaching to raise her own family, she never lost her love of learning and education. Samuel, true to his childhood declaration, became a skilled ranch hand and cowboy. He loved the outdoor life and showed a particular gift for training horses. By the time he was in his early 20s, people were bringing horses from all over the territory for him to work with. Jake and Lily gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch as their children took over more responsibility. They still lived on the ranch, still helped where they could, but they also allowed themselves to slow down and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. In 1905, on a warm day much like the one where their story had really begun, Lily found herself on her knees again. But this time, she was not scrubbing floors in a saloon. She was in her own garden, planting flowers beside the house she and Jake had built together. Her knees still ached from the position, though now it was arthritis rather than overwork. Her hands were still rough and work-worn, but they were also adorned with that simple gold band that had never left her finger in over 20 years of marriage. Jake came around the corner of the house, walking a bit slower than he used to, his hair now more gray than brown. He saw Lily on her knees in the garden and smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "Need some help?" he asked. "I would love some," Lily said. Jake knelt beside her, just as he had done so many times before, and together they planted flowers in the garden of the home they had built, surrounded by the ranch they had created and the family they had raised. The moment was simple and ordinary and absolutely perfect. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching another sunset, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had come for Sunday dinner, Jake took Lily's hand. "You remember what I said all those years ago when I asked you to marry me?" he asked. "You said a lot of things," Lily replied with a smile. "Which part?" "I said I would spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "I remember." "Well," Jake said, "I am still trying, and I will keep trying until my last breath." "You succeeded a long time ago," Lily assured him. "You have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. This life we have built together, our family, our home, it is everything I could have wanted and more." "Same for me," Jake said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lily Jennings. I loved you when you were scrubbing floors in Henderson's saloon, and I love you even more now. That love has only grown with every year, every challenge, every joy we have shared." "I love you too," Lily said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, their hands entwined, their lives completely and beautifully intertwined. Around them, their grandchildren played in the yard while their children talked and laughed. The ranch stretched out in all directions, prosperous and thriving, a testament to what two people could build together with love and determination. The woman who had once thought she had nothing left, who had scrubbed floors on her aching knees and wondered if she would ever feel happy again, had found everything. The wandering cowboy who had knelt beside her and offered his heart had found a home. Together, they had created a legacy that would last long after they were gone, a story of love and redemption, and the power of two people choosing to face life together. As the stars came out one by one above the New Mexico territory, Lily and Jake Jennings held hands and watched their family, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. From a wax-slicked saloon floor to a thriving ranch, from loneliness and struggle to love and abundance, theirs was a story worth living. And as they sat there together, with decades of shared memories behind them and whatever time remained ahead, they knew that every moment, every challenge, every joy had been worth it. The cowboy had knelt beside her when she was at her lowest, and in doing so, had lifted them both to heights neither could have reached alone. That simple act of kindness, of seeing her and choosing to help, had been the beginning of everything. And now, looking back across more than 2 decades of marriage and partnership, they could see the beautiful life that had grown from that single moment of connection. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though there had been elements of both along the way. It was a story of daily choices, of showing up for each other, of working together toward shared dreams. It was a story of scrubbing floors and waxing them, of planting gardens and raising children, of building a business and a home and a life worth living. It was, in the end, a story of love, the deep and abiding kind that weathers all storms and grows stronger with each passing year. And it was a story that would continue, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest beginnings, when one person chooses to kneel beside another and offer not just help, but hope, partnership, and love.